Welcome back to the second half of All About Money. By 2020, women are expected to hold 72 trillion US dollars of the world's financial assets. In this part of the world, in Asia, women account for around 50% of the region's population and 36% of GDP. But only 12% of board seats and merely 3% of CEO positions are currently occupied by women. With women around the world said to be the economy bigger than the US and China, what more can we do to make the world a friendlier place for women? Joining us today is Gwen Faure, PwC Hong Kong partner. Gwen, thank you so much for stopping by. I've been so excited about this chat because I know that PwC, you guys recently released the latest 2019 Women in Work Index. So can you run us through some of the key findings? What are the good ones? What are the bad ones that, in your opinion?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me to talk about our Women in Work Index. We launch this every year with International Women's Day, so this is very timely. The main findings that we found this year, so it's been updated for 2017 numbers. This is our 7th year tracking the progress of women economic empowerment. And our main finding is that there has been slow progress, which is heading in the right direction. In terms of gender pay equality, there has been some progress in some countries. In terms of female workforce participation, there's also been some improvements. However, in other indexes that we look at, things have pretty much remained the same. And I should add that the index is for the OECD countries. So we've been tracking about 33 countries and how they're doing.
Right. So, I mean, I just mentioned to you, like, I wish you guys could do some studies about this part of the world because obviously the Women in Work Index, you guys studied about the maybe slightly more equal economies, which is a lot to learn for economies in this part of the world. But in terms of in Asia Pacific, in this part of the world, how are countries doing in terms of gender equality?
Sure. So in the index itself, there are a few of the countries listed, and in fact, you'll be pleased to hear from this region, New Zealand actually came 3rd for the first time this year. So that's very exciting. For us, as we looked at the index, China and India are not a part of the countries, but because they actually make up 1/3 of the women workforce or population, we wanted to take a closer look at what the numbers would mean for them if we did start tracking. And some very interesting results were found. So particularly in India, I think because of social cultural norms about the role of women in society and in the family, actually only 50% less of women participate in the workforce than their male counterparts. For us as a study, we're looking at what that implication means. We think if you can raise the participation level of women in the workforce in India, the result could be an impact, of about 6 trillion USD to add it to the GDP. At the same time, in China, actually, what's really interesting, 7 out of 10 women are already in the workforce. So that's not the problem in China. The problem in China is actually there's a 25% gender pay disparity. And if we looked at that number, and if you raised that level of, if you resolve the gender pay gap, actually that could mean a 2 trillion US dollars addition to female earnings. Right.
So I know that in your studies, the same study that you just mentioned, in Hong Kong alone, there's like a 22% pay gap. And but then obviously when I was looking at the studies at Women in Work Index, I was seeing some countries in this world, they're doing a really good job, such as Sweden and Scandinavian countries. But in terms of trying to match that level of gender equality, like for Hong Kong, does it stand a chance? And what else? What more does the city have to do in terms of facilities, policies? How could they really match that kind of equality?
Got you. So I think Sweden is a very interesting case. We use it as our sort of the standard to hold everybody up to, because they have this very good balance of policies, government policies, as well as organization policies, to enable each individual to have a focus on the work and life that they want. So, for example, they have a very generous shared parental leave policy that allows, parents as as a whole to take leave up to 16 months, paid leave for 16 months, which is amazing when you're coming from Hong Kong, right?
Exactly. In Hong Kong, they're just thinking about increasing it to up to 14 weeks.
Exactly, and not at full pay.
Exactly.
So I think, so when we turn back to, so for me, Sweden is interesting because of, not only because of the policies that are in place, but also the culture that supports not just women, but also men to do what they want for their family life and their work life. Whereas in Hong Kong, I mean, if we, you mentioned all the statistics at the beginning, we have, as you said, 22% gender pay gap. We have 55% of our women are in the workforce, despite, if you think, in universities, overwhelming females in university education at the moment. Plus, 13.9% of our women hold board positions in the Hang Seng Index companies, which is a little bit concerning. But in terms of what we can do about it, actually, I was also involved in another survey this year, in conjunction with the Women's Foundation and at the commission of a group of women who are the chief executive women in Hong Kong, where we did a specific look at financial services because those women were part of financial services. And in our survey, we did identify 5 particular areas where it's important for women to make work a better place for them. So we talk about recruitment is absolutely important in terms of being, having diverse measures and requirements. We talk about retention. How do you keep women in the workforce in the senior levels? Because in our survey, we found that, in the entry level, it was about 54% female. But then when you get to senior management level, it becomes about 32%. And then when you get to board level, it's about 21%. So, the decrease is quite steep as you think about it. And that's not surprising for any one of us, right? So something needs to be done about retention. But then at the same time, retention brings on to why do people leave? Why are women leaving the workforce? And, a generic conception would be that women are leaving to become carers in their families, right? So for children or for elderly parents, etc. When we looked at the survey, interestingly, that's not the case. So we asked each organization for their data on why people are leaving, and we also surveyed employees on why they would be leaving a company. And the answer was 73% was that lack of career progression. Women aren't being heard. They feel like they aren't being heard. They don't feel like they have the role models. They don't know how to progress their careers. So interestingly, it's not about care, which is obviously a problem and a challenge for us as a society, and all those things come with it. But at the same time, actually, the conversation should be about how do you help women progress in their careers.
Right.
So fourthly, we looked at flexible working. So every company, and ours included, are doing flexible working schemes. And how does that work? How do you build that into your culture? And how do you make it work for you? And lastly, of course, we looked at the gender pay gap. But in our survey, we very much wanted to understand the perception against reality. So we looked at we went in with a preconception of there is definitely a gender pay gap, and we know from the stats it's 22%. In the employees that we surveyed, absolutely, they believed there was a gender pay gap. But when we talked to the CEOs of each firm, when they looked at the data from a snapshot in time perspective, they say that there isn't. Now, interesting, right? And so I think the conversation from gender pay gap should be about the longevity of how long can women get to those levels where they get paid more.
Right.
So if you think about career progression perspective, if you think about what a female needs to do in her sort of lifetime, there are times where they have to be out of the workforce and then come back to it, etc.
Exactly.
It does take women, unfortunately, longer to get to the same levels as a man. And so if you look at it across a career, there is a gender pay gap. Issue, right?
And instead of gender pay gap, you just mentioned that flexibility is also one very important factor. But I could imagine companies in Hong Kong, they might not be so flexible. So can you give us some advice in terms of expectations-wise, like employees, what kind of flexibility can they expect, and what kind of flexibility do companies need to give their employees in terms of retaining more talent?
Sure. I think flexibility, if you speak to and then now survey to a lot of female in the workforce is absolutely key because they have so many roles in life, right?
Yeah.
It's not that they're not dedicated to their work, but they are also dedicated to their children and their family. And unfortunately, that just means they have to be in many places at the same time. I mean, women are good multitaskers, but not that good. But anyway, back to, in terms of our survey, when we looked at flexibility and flexible working, it's interesting. There are many firms that actually have policies on flexible working, and they ask their employees to opt in. But then when we looked at the data and when you talk about in practice what is happening, not many people do that because it's a bit too formalized. The nature of flexible working is you take it when you need it.
Yeah.
So I think lots of firms are going different ways of approaching this problem, and that's for me the most interesting point.
And I could imagine stigma being one challenge as well.
Absolutely. So we've talked to some financial services organizations, right? And in some roles, like if you're a trader, you really can't leave your terminal. Like for those hours, you kind of have to be there. True. So it's also on a case-by-case, role-by-role basis. But one of the best things I think out of the survey that we've done and the learning is that for some organizations, they're making it a team-based decision. So as a team, you talk about what flexibility is it that you need. It doesn't have to be, I have to go pick up a child from school. It can be, I actually really like basketball and I do really want to make a game, right? So I think the point about flexible working is we want everybody to be happy. Everybody is a little bit different in terms of what it needs to make them happy. So as a team, there needs to be that trust that you can be flexible. Communication is key, so you need to keep talking to each other to make sure you're all there. But at the same time, having that collaborative effort on what diversity means to your team and therefore each person, I think it's absolutely key.
Right, very quickly. So because I know that some organizations in Hong Kong and Asia, in terms of embracing the trend of having women, more inclusive workplace, they would be like, okay, I'll hire one woman to the team. Yes. That's diversity, that's inclusion. But in your opinion, or in PwC's suggestions, like what kind of policies or like what do they need to do to minimize this kind of problem?
Sure, I think well, in both of the index and the survey that we've done, policy is absolutely important. You do need a policy for diversity to make sure people start thinking about it. However, in practice, how that works is up to each team and each manager, right? I understand what you're saying. I think at least it's a start. For me, personally, it's a start in the journey to making sure that people are a bit more inclusive. We're opening the door wider for other females to be in those organizations and those decision-making bodies, I would say. That's why there's such an important, he for she is so important for us. As a, not result, but linked to he for she, the Women's Foundation also now has a Male Allies program. And we're part of that, absolutely. And the idea is that it's not so much about discrimination, but it's more about bringing everybody to the party.
Right.
We live in a world where you do have male and female, employees, right? Women can be empowered and do many things by themselves, but they're still in a world there are male colleagues. So we need everybody to be part of that journey to understand how you support each other and build that diversity together,
Gwen,
right?
Thank you so much for your time today. It's always great having a female leader on the show. That was Gwen Faure, PwC Hong Kong partner. This is it from this edition of All About Money. We'll be back right here on HKIBC next Sunday. Good night.